teacher for all my life. My specialty was freshmen who, 18-year-old, just coming in the door, usually scared. A lot of people don't want to deal with 18-year-olds coming in the door, but that was my specialty because I felt that if I taught them how to make things, how to make beautiful things, and at a very high level of craftsmanship, they would then go on and be able to make better art or whatever. The last 11 years I've been at University, Indiana, University of Pennsylvania outside Pittsburgh, taking a small woodworking program and expanding it out to have, as far as I know, the only dedicated wood-turning studio in the country. We had 12 one-ways, full-size one-ways, and then a bunch of mini-ways. As part of the curriculum that didn't really work out, I discovered one day when I was talking with my colleague that she felt that wood-turning was a cult, and that was sort of that conversation. We had a couple of years of really go. We won some awards at the Pittsburgh show with student work, but it didn't really blossom the way that I had hoped to. But it was clear that there was an audience there in young people, and the AAW I read a thing on opera the other day, is that the problem with opera is that all the people that love opera are dying. AAW is much the same way, is that there's not a lot of young people coming into it, and part of that is because we don't have industrial arts anymore. It's become 3D printing, which I don't even want to get into. It's not about this. There's a 4-page feature in the journal, the June journal that's coming out, the AAW journal that I wrote, and it's sort of about it's about my personal history of starting in college. I had the luck of having a studio art major, but also a minor in industrial arts. And then my first teaching job was in an industrial arts college in upstate New York. So I'm very anchored in industrial arts, but then I was one of the people then that kind of brought us to some of where we are now. In terms of collaboration, it's been around forever. If you're married, you've been collaborating. If you've been married a long time, you're a successful collaborator. The results of your collaboration can probably be seen either in your garden or your children or whatever. But in wood turning, because the field is so young, really 1981 is sort of the watershed mark for wood turning in terms of the first exhibition in wood turning. And then I think the AAW was founded in 1985. Let's say 1985. Because they just celebrated their 30th anniversary. So the field is very, very young, and I've written several articles about the fact that those first 20 or 30 years were very, very intensive investigation of wood turning as a process. And as a result of the AAW has at any given time 15,000 members. So that, and there are 15,000 members that tend to have a little extra money on the side. Dentists, engineers, all sorts of things, like people like that. So that has allowed the field to develop technology at a rate that's just been extraordinary. John and I were talking about the fact that we still have our Buck Brother iron steel scrapers that were the industrial art too. You scraped everything. And so I didn't actually use a cutting tool until about in the early 90s. And I remember Rudy Assaulting coming over and just like laughing at my tools because they were all scrapers. So a lot of what we take for granted now in terms of, and I think the level of exploration here is incredible. This person, who did this one?
I did.
What's your name?
Mike Ellis.
Mike, I have no idea why a beginner would take a piece of wood full of voids and soft and hards and lips like this and do this. I just, like, what were you thinking? rather than a nice solid piece of wood.
The reason is because my collaborator likes those inclusions.
Okay.
And the experiences are used to those.
So in 1991, I started, my friends were at that point the innovators in the fields. We kind of were coming up through the field together. They were trying to make sculpture. They were trying to move wood turning from bowls to something that would be considered more artful. And in that process, they made mistakes. They had failures. And I was lucky enough to I'm very good at seeing shapes in the clouds. The night in the clouds. Which is a skill that, if you're worried about our society, that is a skill that fewer and fewer children have. My wife has taught high school for about 30 years, and she has mentioned several times, just seeing shapes in the clouds, and the students have no idea what she's talking about. So I was able to see other shapes in these things that my friends were throwing away, and started collecting them. And the deal that I struck real early with Robin Horn when she gave me some of her work was that if I could not make exhibition quality work, I was to burn their work. And so one New Year's Eve, I burned a Robin Horn sculpture, which they don't burn very well to start with because they're these big lumps. But that's the deal that I struck to people, is that if I couldn't do my very, very best with their work, in terms of rearranging it into a new sculpture or whatnot, then it wouldn't see the light of day. It wasn't going to be given away or anything like that. And so I unwittingly started the collaboration movement in the AEW, along with Mark Sperry and Michael Hoselick, who at the very same time were starting, they called it a telegraph collaboration, where Mark would turn a bowl, he would send it to Mike Hoslock up in Canada, Mike would cut it in some way, put it back in the box and send it to Mark. Mark would do something else to it, cut it, burn it, pierce it, color it, send it back to Mike. And this would go on like for 6 or 8 trips. And they developed an entire body of work based on this telegraph system of kind of sequential collaboration. Not really a plan. It's like, I'm going to do this, you do something, you send it back. So collaboration can take many forms. Do we have a Doug? Do we have?
Here it comes.
I pause in between. So why collaborate? In terms of wood turning, fortunately, I met with a small group on Wednesday as a kind of a dry run on this, and we were wondering who might even be interested in collaboration. And one of the things that came up just during break is that one of the folks here is interested in collaborating with somebody that does segmented turning. So in terms of why collaborate, especially in wood turning, and I want to talk about wood turning, not marriage or whatever. One is that the challenge of getting together with somebody is probably going to make you grow. Just even having a conversation with somebody about what you could do with your work or combine with their work is going to allow both parties to grow. Another aspect of it is that if you get around the table with 3 or 4 people's work on the table, let's say that this is the work of 3 or 4 people, then you can start to talk about why is it oval, why did you paint it black, why is this apparently part of something but not the whole vessel. And that's pretty straightforward. If you look on the inside, is that it's obvious that I was having trouble controlling the spalt, and apparently that something happened out here in my vessel, and I just couldn't cope with throwing the whole thing away. So I saved this. It was already lacquered. I'd already figured out the outside, so this was kind of pretty. So it's been floating around in my box for about 20 years. Given one of the things that I'm going to talk about in collaboration, though, is that this was another throwaway. You can see through the bottom of this thing. This is a little oak bowl. And in carrying it in, it fell inside this. And this is not something that I would normally do. So immediately now, I have a new combination, in this case by accident. But the purpose of collaboration then is that one of your neighbors might do that. They might also go, oh, it would fit like this. Maybe you should just burn this. Maybe because this is thin here at the bottom, this gets cut out, and this, so I could cut this into a swirl. So that having a lot of diversity physically on the table will really help. The other thing is just, it gets you out of the rut in terms of thinking. Just in terms of doing this, there was an ooh factor from the audience. It's just, now you can have an oak bowl. The light doesn't shine through my mistake. Looks like a good bowl, right? And now I've got this inset into this maple form, and now possibly, maybe I start to look at some other combination that might salvage this. It might still be firewood when I'm done, but the idea of collaborating with someone is that you get something from them. So the definition of collaborating with people is working with someone to produce something. In terms of what we do, I think 3 is probably the best number, 4 maybe, but definitely not 5 or 6. You've got too many Indians and chiefs, and you've got too many chiefs in the tribe there. You can also collaborate with the material, and this is what most people think of in terms of what we're doing, is that this would be collaborating with the material. And if you're going to get together then, and try collaboration, bring as much stuff as you can, bring the greatest variety that you can, and I suggest bringing things like this, because if I need my bowl to be higher, now it's higher. This isn't specifically maybe what I want to do because it's really bulky, but it gets my bowl up higher. The fact that it happens to be standing on this walnut platter there is an unexpected thing. And I've got this rim that's left over. I've been carrying this around for 30 years. And maybe it has some kind of idea here that I can play with. So working with materials is something that's very common, or you can do both. And that's really what I'm here to talk about. In general, then, artists and designers are more comfortable starting with ideas. So I would say, let's make something tall. It's going to be a bird bath, and it's going to be blue. And we would start scribbling on paper or whatever and do that. Most people here are probably going to be much more comfortable with coming from a craftsman's kind of an approach, which is about materials and processes, which is very much involved with the wood, involved with the fact that this is already here. I don't have to guess what this thing is. I also don't have to know how to sketch or doodle or draw. So there's a comfort, if you're going to collaborate, there's a comfort in just bringing stuff, even rejects, that other people might see in your work. My suggestion is that whether it's people or materials, is that character is important. We were in this meeting the other night as we were leaving, somebody mentioned President Trump. And we realized that maybe, like this year, you want to put together your group of 3 introverts who all voted for Trump. Or 3 extroverts who all voted for Ralph Nader or something. Especially if you know each other, the more that either the materials or the characters in the people themselves will help. So this could be people, ideas, the materials, or even the process. So So one of the thing about the segmented turner idea, somebody mentioned that they would really like to collaborate with somebody that does segmented turning because they had an idea that then would fill in some of the gaps with other materials, and they were all excited about filling in the gaps. And that is exactly where I'm coming from in collaboration, is that I don't want to do segmented turning. I think it's fantastic, and this is one of the best pieces I've ever seen, but I don't personally want to do it. And so a lot of what I have built my reputation on is getting parts from other people and then looking for some sort of unique output. So the idea of collaboration is that you know that your goal here is some sort of unique output. The main device that I would suggest that you use for a collaboration meeting is the idea of brainstorming. I have worked with this for all of my career and really kind of worked it out. And one of my students once called it ideas without thinking. And the goal of brainstorming then, no matter how long or short it is a quantity of ideas, a quantity of options. They don't have to be cosmic ideas. They might be different ways the lip could move. It might be, what color should the lip of my bowl be? Does this yellow work? Is that what you wanted? Does it work with the color there? I obviously go to Lowe's a lot. You could collect colors that you like and then just literally cut and tape them on your bowl so that there's no guessing. And then if you really want to, you can go back to Lowe's and say, I want one of those sampler jars for $3.68 and get it in satin, and it'll be perfectly, you don't even have to know the color wheel. It's like, I want M37. A lot of samples already there for you in terms of possibilities. And so the goal here is a quantity of responses. It's not a quantity of solutions. And that's the important thing about getting together with other people, is you're looking at the what if of it, and then you're going to figure out how to do it. It's not generally, we're going to sit down and do off-center turning here. Off-center turning comes from talking about the idea. The two most important of 7 steps in brainstorming, the first 2 and the hardest 2 are something called deferred judgment, and then the fact that you have to record everything. And I was getting on Tom's case, Tom's coming along, he's listening to what I have to say, is that as adults, we came through our teenage years, we figured out which group to hang with and how to dress and whatnot. And as adults then, we have figured out the answers to more and more things. During brainstorming, the hardest thing to do for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes is to not know anything. It's just like, this is clunky. I need to make it taller. So how do you make it taller? I don't know. How do you make it taller? You put stuff under it. Maybe you put more and more stuff on it, and then it's slanted, and think, well, that's kind of cool. And your neighbor says, I hate slanted things. So then you put some gum under here and you make it flat. The other part of this then that is really difficult, even in an age of phones with the cameras, is that, and Mark Zutell was talking about this the other night. He's saying, you know, I'll have more ideas in the morning. That's the exact problem, is that you'll have more ideas in the morning, and today's ideas have gone zippity-doo-dah, you know, out into the netherworld, and they're gone. So Tom was saying that he was trying out some of my ideas and apparently doing this and then this and seeing, you know, how they work. And my point is that you should have your phone on camera mode, and it doesn't matter if your fingers are in the picture, okay? So you do this, and then this, and then this, and then maybe you get down here and do this, or you get up here and do this. and you record or you do doodles, you don't have to draw. Doodling is what this is about. This is a sketch. This is an idea. If this ends up being something that you like, you can go back in and do the parts. And that's what I loved about the discussion about that black line there where he didn't want the two pieces together. That is a genius to me because he recognized that those two were beautiful but not necessarily next to each other, and he had to do something there. So having eyeball stuff around like this is part of the purposeful play of brainstorming so that you can remember what you have. And a picture is going to be literally worth 1,000 words here. So this is kind of my standard thing in terms of making bowls get higher. Raised vessels have been my sort of thing for my entire career. The idea that most of the problems that I see occur in vessels occur right here. It's how they come down, like right there, and then how does it meet the ground. Tom does this with his beautiful walnut bowl, and he had no base of it. Just like, but he had this beautiful, perfect curve. It didn't come down and go square because there was that much walnut. It was just this wonderful curve. And that takes a huge amount of discipline and skill to resolve that curve. So these two are the very, very most important thing. Defer judgment. Just say, you know, that looks too tall, that looks too short, that looks like a stegosaurus, whatever. And you should jot these down on a piece of paper. Jot down the date. Jot down the idea. I suggest that you, if you sketch at all, you use just photocopy paper, just 8.5 by 11 paper. Jot down the date. We're going to do maple bowls today. I want them to be taller. And then you do sketches or doodles and you write with your sketches. Speed is absolutely important here. If you slow down in a collaboration setting, then you'll start to figure out how to do it. And that's not the initial point of brainstorming. The initial point is like, and I did this on Lars Larsson's wife the other day. I said, hey, you know, Lars has got all these plates and stuff he's shown me that he doesn't like, but he's got out on the shelf. And Doris then does tapestry. She does images with glued paper, and I guess the day I was there, she was dripping acrylic on things just to find out what a drippy acrylic looked like. I said, Doris, you know, why don't you take some of his plates and do some embroidery on the edges or something, or glued paper or something. And so when they went on vacation, there's already 2 or 3 of his rejects in the box that she's going to play with this summer. So you don't necessarily need to collaborate with a woodturner. There's all sorts of people. There's also all sorts of skills. Like you wanted to collaborate with a segmented turner. So that then is going to create some sort of new combination. Crude is good. This is not about the finished thing. It's about saying, that looks pretty cool. I would like walnut there. Or I want a natural rim bowl there. Or that really is squat. Maybe I need to do this. So that these are sketches that are very quick. There's nothing committed to them. I can't be embarrassed. I got this horn here. Maybe that's got something. Maybe I'll do like a rustic horn thing there. I'm about to actually use this. I can show you a piece that I did. And then the other thing about collaborating is that it should be fun. My experience is that if you're not laughing and kind of moving around and poking each other in terms about what you're seeing, then it's probably not working. So again, the goal of the initial getting together is just to come up with ideas. Many of them are going to be throwaways. But the idea behind brainstorming is that all you're looking for is the one little golden nugget of blue on that rim would be so much better than yellow. One of the big turning points of my career was that I had just I had done a really tall, complicated vessel with sandblasted edge, and I had painted it red, really bright red. I was loving this thing. And Kim walks down and it's like, you wood turners, all you see is maple and walnut. You don't see that the maple is yellow, green. And red looks like somebody fell on this thing. And so again, the collaboration there worked in that I started to look at wood as color rather than just maple. So does it have some green in it? Does it have some yellow in it? And so then when I go to paint or tone or dye or wood burn or whatever, what might be better with that? And so you're looking for a number of responses. It does not have to be weird or threatening. That's one of my main points. You could get together with guys and say, I want to color the rim of my bowl, but I really am kind of clueless about what to do. And Ray will say, well, why don't we put some Q-tips on here? Let's hot melt some Q-tips on here. And it's like, oh my, shut up. But that's the point of brainstorming, is that Jeff would say, oh, I like that idea, but let's put little sticks on it. And you'll say, no, I just want color. So maybe we get around to discussing blues and yellows, finally. Or markers, maybe markers, or wood burn, or bleached. So that maybe something as simple as, what do I do with the lip of my bowl, is the topic of the brainstorming. And so you can brainstorm with something as simple, but the goal of it is to come up with possibilities. And you don't have to do them, they're takeaways, and if you've recorded them, they're just this little treasure chest then that you can go back to now or later. So you can sort them and evaluate them, but you can only sort them and evaluate them if you have them to sort. So the business of ideas is that they're very quick, they go away. And especially if you're working with other people saying outrageous things that you didn't expect, then that needs to be recorded, even if it's just like Tom's post-it notes did. In art making, the idea of producing something can be the search for new, original. A lot of times it's novel. It's something that you could probably pick up at Spencer Gifts or Pier 1 or whatever. But more importantly for me then, the idea of collaborating is to find a way to make something that for you. It's not generic. It's not, and I don't mean this as a put down, but it's not just the bowl. It's something more in terms of a very personal shape, style, treatment of something of the term form. So while invention are things that are new, most of life is about innovation. So we're going to play off of things. One of the things I've seen is that there's not a lot of knowledge of the history of our field. There's a place in Philadelphia called the Center for Art in Wood, that if you have not gone to their website, you should. It's sort of the history of contemporary wood turning. It used to be called the Woodturning Center, but they felt that they wanted to support, broader kinds of artistic uses of wood. So it's the Center for Art in Wood, and everybody should go there. And discovery doesn't need to be huge. It can be tiny little bits of growth. Again, I was bothering Tom about dating his post-it notes so that he knows when he came up with the idea. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from a physicist, actually. And his research is the business of going up alleys to see if they're blind. What we do is research. And you can either pay attention to the research and get better and better, or you can just kind of repeat the experiment over and over again. But it's this looking at our work in terms of, is it tall, is it squat, kind of being out of love with it for a minute, long enough to make some decisions about how things might look. And I guess one of the things as I do this is that, one of my frustrations is that many of you actually turn wood better than me. Certainly most of you turn quicker than I do. And in that regard, you probably have a whole bunch of these. So why not start to play around with how these things might be in a different way? Is that you don't even have to compromise utility. If utility is really important to you, that'll still hold my popcorn. But now it's this really totally different thing. Maybe I devise a system where this lives out, pass my popcorn around, and then I set it back down in here, or I separate them. I work it out to where maybe I separate these things. So the beauty of your skill at wood turning is that you have a lot of what I would call parts, and that those can be recombined in all sorts of ways. If you're going to enter into collaboration, then you need to know basically two things. And it was interesting that this first one really stopped Jeff Grill when we were talking about this, is that the product can't be just yours. The whole point of collaboration is getting other people's opinion. And in this case, if you physically work together, then you've got one thing that 3 or 4 people have worked on. So where does this thing live now? And that's where a lot of people that do collaboration, they're not even really concerned about the final product. They're excited just to get together with people and go through some ideas and see what's going, and then go home and their brain's been fertilized and activated. And the other thing is that everybody must contribute and give and take. And this might be a reason where and some of you have been in business and whatnot, you know the idea of extroverts and introverts, is that it's really easy for an extrovert to just run over people. Not necessarily being a bully, but just doesn't seek out other ideas. So get 3 quiet people at the table together, and all of a sudden they start talking. I don't even know how an introvert gets through the day. But 3 extroverts together, and it's like we're fighting over who's going to talk next. So the idea is to get a lot of ideas, a lot of possibilities, none of which you're committed to. But the point, I think the biggest point is that you get ideas that you wouldn't ever get on your own. And you get them in sort of a hearty exchange of honesty. So it's not for everyone. Basic success basically involves Dale Carnegie's list of ways to get along with people. A positive attitude certainly is good. And the idea that you're going to have to, and this is where the humor enters into it, is that even the other night we were really tagging some people. It's like, Mark, this bowl, I didn't say it sucked, but it's just like, he had this giant bowl that came down and went, and it was about an inch thick. And we were talking about cutting the bottom out, using the rim like this one. We were wondering if there was enough wood to save. And it's that laughter, sort of hearty atmosphere that I really personally enjoy, because you can be really kind of finger in the chest in terms of your comments, but also then understand that you don't have to take it away. You don't have to like it, but just record it. Take some pictures of these things and make some doodles and make some notes. The other thing is that you have to talk about your idea. You don't keep it inside. You externalize it. And that you have to practice deferred judgment. When we were together the other night, Ray said something that was probably politically incorrect, and he said, it looks like a Chinaman. And it's like everybody knew what he was talking about. And he was right. It looked like a figurative head and whatnot. And so my immediate response was, oh God, that is so wrong to say that. And I don't like the idea. But my job then was to join in that conversation and say, well, if you were going to do that, how could you do it better? And so even as even as practiced as I am as teaching students this, I find deferred judgment really difficult still in terms of if a really new idea comes up, your first response is probably going to be to dislike it. And your job then is to grow, just in terms of the discussion. I have prepared some samples to show you what collaboration can do. This is the entertaining part. I realize that none of you probably even know what I do, so I've taken the floor in terms of some early stuff of mine. I like torn wood, the stuff that bulldozers have come up with, and my main forte is taking rock and roll songs and going backwards through the lyrics to create a scene. And this is Sting's song called Don't Stand So Close to Me, which is about a teacher and a young girl and the temptation and all that. So you've got this really dangerous teenage girl on the left there with spiky hair and doodads and whatnot. And then you've got the professor in his little tight shirt and whatnot. My background is actually in furniture making, so I'm actually hoping to get back to some of these sort of Adirondack stands with a turned top and element, and then the idea that I really want to play with is a very stylized fish in amongst the legs here. The raised vessel then took all sorts of forms during the 80s, looking for gesture, looking for, I was very early in the sandblasting era. I've never turned very big things. I go over to Jeff Grill's shop and he's turned like a 2-foot bowl in 3 hours, and I've never turned anything that big. So my approach has been to take very small things like the one on the left, which is 4 inches in diameter, and through sandblasting, the use of paint, and then these figurative elements of tenoning. They're actually tenoned into the side of the bowl, which is sort of my furniture approach. And I like to talk about the one on the right because, not so much in terms of collaboration, but what other people can bring to your work, including wives and husbands. This is called Falls River Bowl. I took special burl, dyed it blue so it was like water. I've got this terracotta pipe color over the sandblasted bowl, and it's all lacquered inside. And then in Houston, I was showing this picture, and the guy said, "What's with the elephants?" and once you see the elephants, it's all over. You know, I worked 100 hours on this piece to make it look like water, and you don't even get it. So I did a lot of research into pedestals and how they might work. The white on the left is plexiglass. That I worked a lot with plexiglass early on as an element in my wood turning, and I think it was probably with this one on the left that I started using threaded rod and epoxy as a center shaft so that everything could expand radially from it, because I knew that if I glued all this stuff together, it was just going to explode after a while. This is some early work. The one on the left was just acquired by the Center for Art in Wood. This is an off-center turned stump with added elements. The one on the right, I know there's an attitude that you should burn all your bad work, but this is a piece that had this really soft, spalted spot in the edge. But the rest of the bowl is sort of like this. Is that these are probably from the same era, is that it was already finished. It was just this beautiful piece of wood, but it had this wonky divot out the side. And it stayed around the shop for years until I came up with this idea of sort of a spiral cleft in the piece. And this spiral idea is something that I've used repeatedly. If you've seen any image of my work, this is probably it. This is my first sandblasted bowl. The legs are not meant to be anything in particular, although I've had all sorts of stories about it. And this is really well known because David Ellsworth runs a school of turning and had a great big slab walnut table that everybody had dinner over. And that table had a crack down the middle of it. And David bought this, and this piece sat on his dinner table arching that crack. So at dinner, everybody that came to his school saw my piece. And so of anything that I've made, this has been probably seen by more people than any. I've been real concerned with details and how things come together. And then this actually on the right is the base of one of Mark Spheri's pieces. This happened in about 1991. Mark sent me this leg. It was, I think, his first off-center turning experiment. He was the innovator of the whole off-center turning thing. He signed the square part to my friend Steve. And then about 2 hours later, I saw this ad the very same day with these weird geometric shapes that these fancy suited people are sitting on. And so I came up with this figure. I sawed the top of Mark's leg off and created this figure. And for both Mark and I then, this figure became one of the things that we both have worked on through our career. So this is called On the Road to Dollywood. And I've taught several times down in Aramont, and Dollywood then is the place up the road, the fun park and whatnot. But Dolly here is the surrealist in terms of the drapey clock over the piece of wood. So it's supposed to be kind of this strange figure. People have seen Michael Jackson, all sorts of things. And it was with this piece that I decided that one of my previous life was a hairdresser. I've really been fascinated with hair on my figures. This is the piece that I told you about, the horn. I think Michael Hasselnick had turned the bowl. I was at a collaborative, and this horn just absolutely fit perfectly around this bowl. And then I drilled it and tethered it through. At the same workshop then, a fellow from Canada was showing off how he could use these new tools he had designed to do these really deep vessels. And I then had the idea for a birdhouse using these Adirondack stick things. And so Andre turned this huge vessel for me, and somebody made me a little copper top there as a breather, and then the legs come up through the sides of the tall piece. And so collaboration for me has been the idea of having an idea and driving toward it. People mistakenly think that I get all these gems from my friends, and this is more of an example of what I start with when I collaborate with materials. This was a really, really bad poplar figure from Mark Spheri in one of his demonstrations. And the base then in the right was left over from somebody in a previous workshop, and they had left it because they couldn't get it off the faceplate. They'd screwed up the screws so bad that it was still mounted to the faceplate. And so part of my initial job was simply to drill out the screws. From that then, I created a tall figure. And I started using appliques like lapels. I cut up some of my previous wood turnings from the capes. The hat was turned, the hair was turned, and then I made this really dangerous kind of base down inside using pins and beads and whatnot. So I have had the luxury of having these reject figures from Mark Spheri since the mid-90s to play with. One day, these two chubby people, as he called them, showed up literally in the mail with this. There was a Post-it note that said, "These are my chubby people. I'd be interested if you played with the space between them." So I wanted to use that positive, negative space. And I think these are the only two chubby people he ever made. I took the song Orange Colored Sky by Nat King Cole, which talks about this young guy meeting this girl, and then the sky explodes in orange-colored stripes and green spheres and whatnot, and made this really large kind of theatrical sculpture. Using his figures again, but using a lot of non-turning forms. On the left, I did a kind of an abstracted landscape of Rochester where I was living. The skirt then was added as a feature. That was a plate that I had already made. And so my work deals with figures, the relationship to figures, and then gesture a lot. And this is one of my favorite shots from collaborating with Mark. It's just a sweet shot showing his figures and how he's figured out how to do these off-center hips and get some gesture, and then my addition of accessories in terms of making it a very different kind of thing. This is one of my favorite all-time craft photographs. This is, I was teaching at Aramont a design workshop, and Mike Koselick and Mark Fury were teaching a woodturning workshop. And as teachers, they decided that they wanted to make a piece of furniture from one turning. And so they had to start with a really big wood turning. So this is, I think, 4 feet in diameter. It's laminated poplar. That got cut up to become this. It's actually a lid. The top, the flat part hinges, and then they made these sort of 2 rocket forms. And I came into the picture because I volunteered to paint it with my assistant, and this is what it became. The Furniture Society used this as a cover piece for a couple of years. And then the turning class, both my class and their class, turned all the pieces to look like it's in perspective. So what looks like the pieces getting smaller really are getting smaller. So across like 2 feet, there was this calculated size that everybody got their size and they were supposed to make a piece for it. And then I did all the painting and the color surface on it. Mark had, at the time, had been carving these little weird bottles and whatnot from France and painting them like they were products. This was a collaboration for the Bat Show in Louisville. I didn't want to turn a bat, let alone do the wood burning on it, so I went out and bought some junior bats that are like 10 inches long and made my rocket. You can see the ballpoint pen tip there. You can see a pop rivet as the point, some pieces of aluminum tubing that I found, and then the tips of the fuel pods are also pop rivets, and then the exhaust port on the rocket ship is actually an old dial of a radio. And so I specifically that I have used several times for ways that I could turn. Robin Horn did a whole series of what she called geodes. I thought they were extremely plain. I bugged her for several years about how color and texture would make them more interesting. So I was visiting her one time and she gave me 3 of these things. She gave me 3 sculptures. And so in various ways I played around with how to use bleaching, coloring in order to make the composition more interesting. I don't think this one's so successful, but if you're into sandblasting at all, you can blast through grids. This was a metal screen that I blasted through in order to get that effect. I made a table out of one of them. I actually replaced some of her dovetails in order to support the table. And then this is my favorite piece of this series, and this is one of the very few pieces I actually live with. I usually don't like my artwork when I'm done. So this is the fish that's going to be copied into the plant stands, and this uses her geode. I took a pre-made maple sphere and diced it up on the bandsaw, which was really scary. And it is meant to be sort of a bubble of light coming up out of the water inside the geode. So a lot of my reputation is based on composing things. I'm sort of like the conductor of an orchestra. This was up in Canada under super rough conditions. You can see on the left of Mark's very figure that he made for me, one of his little candle stands. I had brought a piece of bone that I wanted to see if I could get that to work together. And this is the figure from a song called Helplessly Hoping that Buffalo Springfield did years ago, about a girl and a guy that kind of hovers and wants to be, and the term is the harlot one, hovers. So this was done by another person in terms of making it more like a harlequin, or not a clown, but a dressed up person. One of the first pieces that I ever found was Stony Lamar. This head was rough turned. It was laying in the back of his studio out on a burn pile, and I immediately saw this National Geographic image in my head. And just to show you how big and how scary the turning is that he's done, is that every surface on this face is turned. Every surface. So the eyes were plugs. When I got it, the eyes were about 3 inches long. And the centers were on the other side of the head. And he had a leg that was concrete into the floor of his shop, where he could turn 3 and 4 foot off-center things. And so the marks in the forehead really were supposed to be then this thing on the left. He was doing a series called the Temple series, where he would turn these surfaces, and then he would put it back on the lathe between centers, which would be the lid there, and the bottom, and he would go in and excavate inside this form. Stuff that's why he was Stony Lamar. And out of that then I made this geisha head, which involved turning. The collar is sandblasted. It really has a lot of overhang. So I had to take a body grinder and actually finish the back out because it was so partially turned when he gave up. And so you can see that there's turned elements, the sandblasted buns and whatnot, and then these made up parts. I bleached the face and then drilled back through the bleaching in order to get the brown in the brow. And then you can see how dramatically I brought these eyes down to just be little surface nubs. The collar is the neck, the red edged piece. The collar is actually a piece of walnut that's been really heavily bleached, and it's only walnut because that's the only chunk of wood that I had big enough at the time to make the collar out of. It was just, that's what it was going to be. It could have been oak or anything. I needed that much wood. The collar then was a vessel that was cut up. I put window screen over it, and then I researched patterns, and I put some cover material over that pattern, and then I blasted down through the window screen, which is a terrific pattern, by the way, to play with. This is another one that came about from having had been given these things by Mark Spheri. This is again how we This again is how far out these people were thinking. These figures are 1/4 of a column. So Mark had put 4 pieces of wood together about this long, turned them, separated them, and then partially carved them, and then thrown them up in the attic because they were not of much interest. So I saw these figures as a body. The sketch on the right I wanted to show you because it's one of the few sketches that I actually make of pieces, and specifically this sketch is the only time that I ever pulled off the road to make the sketch. I was coming off the exit on the way to work, and I actually pulled off the road. Usually I sketch on the steering wheel while I'm driving. It's worse than texting. So this is the one sketch of what I wanted in this figure. I'd already had the bottle from John Jordan, because I had bartered with him. And then I had this idea, and I was visiting David Ellsworth, and I went and I knew that he was doing these big vessel things. Not everybody liked this series of vessels because of the blue paint and the charring and all that. And I told him that I was looking for this cake form that I couldn't possibly make. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, you go up in the attic of my shop and there's this box. And I don't want you to open the box, I just want you to take it. And these pieces were selling, I think at the time, for $4,000. And a person had said that they wanted to buy it. They apparently dropped it and broke it in half. They put it back in the box and sent it back to Dave and said, I guess I don't want this after all. And he just didn't want to see it again. So that became the cape for the form. It was already colored, it was already treated. It was the perfect piece for me. So I added all sorts of detail. So this is sort of a magi figure, it's called, and they came bearing gifts. John Jordan, real early, had tried bottomless bottles, and there were iron bases to them that really didn't work. And so I took that base, and my wife did some gold leafing on it. This is another Mark III figure, and then some hollow turning that were mistakes by a man named Frank Sudol, who started the whole piercing business. And that became this really tall form. There was an experiment in terms of sort of a Jesus figure. I'm not religious, but I know that most people know the stories of Jesus and his birth and his life and whatnot. So it's very easy to play on that as a dialogue. So the thin vessels then got cut up into these cape forms, and then I turned some other forms, and there's paint and brass pins holding the cape on. This is one I did with a student for Bartram's boxes. The wood is from Bartram's Arboretum, and she made this kind of growth form around the piece. And I wanted to show you the piece on the right because I think that for me is important, is that there are things that are made industrially that I can never do. I could never make the black section with the little lines on it. And so I went looking for something. And this happens to be the top of an Axe deodorant bottle. And it was already this black, so I turned forms that went with it and figured out how to paint the same color in order to unify it together. And so it has a hub that runs down through it. It's not just a piece of plastic, but it offers a bit of machine surface that I can't possibly do. Dixie Biggs is known for her wood carving. I know I'm running over, so I'm going to move fairly quickly here. Dixie's uses power carving, does fairly literal leaves, but I'm nudging her out of that. This was a piece that we did for the Turning 30 show. We decided to do something exotic. We wanted to make something really over the top that neither of us had done. So I had done almost no off-center turning. So I took a bowl and put it off-center and then cut it in half, which I don't typically do. And that became this piece that has been shown several places in the journal. And the cherry prongs are compressed wood, this wet stuff that you can form, which is just amazing. And so I wanted to do some things that I had never done. And then we worked together through phone calls and sketches. I made up some mock shapes out of real leaves that I dried. She didn't want to do a feather because Jacques Messery does feathers, and she didn't want to do that. So I was like, we're going to do feathers. You need to get over this, Dixie, just do a feather. So I did some mock-ups, and she basically duplicated them in holly. It's just unbelievable hard work. And then we figured out how to do the prong. We decided how big the prong was going to be. And so this is her process. And then we wanted, it was going to be called gold leaf. So she put this little tiny leaf on the inside, and my wife then gold leafed the interior. Dixie's work is just beyond belief for me. It's just so incredible. And she's very, very literal. So part of today then is a plug for the fact that Dixie and I are going to be doing a 2-week workshop over the 4th of July at Aramont. I'm going to be teaching a design component, and she's going to be teaching the carving component. So this is some of what it took to get that piece. And you can see there a different view. I wanted this idea of light coming through, kind of a random panel, so that there's 2 points of emphasis in the piece. And this is with her working with a guy named Bob Jones from Florida, who's also in the Bartram Boxes show. This is some of her carving that front. She, like me, does a lot of reference photographs and whatnot for her work. I don't really know the backstory on these 2 different pieces, but they were turned and then she embellished them with the surfaces, and they're both bleached. So part of the main idea of collaboration is that you can get into things that you don't normally do. Either you don't have to do them, or you can be taught them. This is some of Mark Fury's work. He's kind of infamous for these playful bats that he does. He loves baseball, so he's done all of these off-center carved bats. He knows off-center turning beyond anything that you and I can think of. This is a bench done with Gary Knox Bennett, where Mark did the legs and then the kind of the slate finish that he does with paint. Another set of the bat series, and then he threw in this slide, which isn't really to the point of collaboration, but this is one of his 4-foot-long off-center figures that ends up being kind of like a spoon shape, but they're 4 feet long, and this is what he turns them in space. And I do crazy stuff on the lathe, but this is just amazing. Jean-Francois Escalons from France, he really was the counterpart to the off-center revolution and is great friends with Mark. I hate Jean-Francois' work. I think it's goofy. It looks European to me. I just like, this isn't American. But he is in the French tradition of being this incredible craftsman. In France, you train and are certified as a turner, and then when they hit the market, they just explode creatively. This is a piece that, I don't like any part of this piece. This is Mark with off-center turned legs, table, and then a whole chess set done by Jean-Francois. And it's just gaudy to me. And personally, I'm of the opinion that furniture should not look like it's moving across the room. That's just me. Betty Scarpino is famed for her carving and bleaching. She has really explored the business of bleaching. She's very, very bold with her use of color. She uses turning and then carving, but a lot of her work still has the signatures of turning, which I really, really value. I think that if you're doing work that doesn't say that it's about wood turning, that you've kind of lost the whole thing. And she's done eggs forever. I was on a panel with her 2 years ago, and I said, you know, Betty used to do eggs, and like I'm done with eggs. And she said, oh, eggs are part of my presentation today. And it was just, she just keeps exploring eggs. And if you want to, in terms of the egg challenge that you did, if you want to look up Betty's website, she's really explored the idea. This was a piece that apparently exploded. This was a German fellow, and I don't really know the story, so again, this is Betty bleaching and probably doing some carving on this. And then I wanted to show you this. This is almost the last piece, but not the last piece. And Dave's not here today. Dave does funerary urns here in the group. And this was a urn, apparently by Mike Mahoney, that was given to Betty, sort of just like, go take this and do something with it. And Betty, I actually wrote her back and said, Betty, you have to tell me about this urn. Because she decided that this was an urn for somebody that had been happy in life. And so it wasn't this serious, dark, heavy thing. This was going to be happy. And so she made a happy urn out of it. And I'm not sure about it, but just in terms of nerve, I think it's amazing. This is actually a box that was turned by a French fella, and then she did her sort of signature bleaching and carving. And this then is a vessel. You can sort of see the vessel. This was to sat around her shop for 5 years before she decided to do something. More eggs. And then I wanted to show you what collaboration was when we were young. This was the Robbie the Robot and what looks like an early Madonna outfit. But she's talking to them. You know, Robbie's going to go fix tea or coffee or whatnot. And then Dixie and I are doing a workshop at Paramount. And my workshops tend to be kind of historic in terms of what happens in them. And I can't encourage you enough to play around with what you have. Tilt it, put stuff under it, paint it, and then if you don't like it, turn it off, turn it upside down. But the main thing that I would comment on is that all of you turn lots of stuff. And so you have parts already laying around. And your parts are different than other people's parts. And there's people here that are turning and carving, and going back to what I've been saying is that I like carving, but I don't have time to really get into it. I'll never do segmenting. I do bleaching, some. But my forte is putting things together. And all of you have things that you do. And collaboration offers you the chance to create or get really new things. They don't have to be weird or odd or you know, insulting or anything. They're just different. And in that way you can participate in the community in a different way, and you can come up with, for me it challenges me because then I have to go back and make the parts to make it work and whatnot. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Steve.